Hi the people, how you doing? Well, this camera comparison, basically every single YouTuber who makes camera comparisons has already made this one, I know. Well, let's just say this is my take on it. I'm mostly going to focus a lot on human subjects because I know that skin tones are in general very good on the iPhones. I'm actually a huge fan of that, but there are other things about the iPhone that, you know, are not so good, and that's precisely why I don't feel it's, a really good camera for me personally. So yeah, let's see how well the S22 Ultra stacks up. Alright, so we are starting off with a pretty tough situation right here. It's backlit by the sun, and I think the S22 Ultra has just slightly better control over the highlight. Some parts of the sky that are not directly close to the sun are not as blown out. It's not a huge difference. I think the iPhone is doing plenty well, and I think the iPhone has actually improved with software updates. But I do want to point out that the warmth in the scene, especially because it's a sunset time, so the warmth in the S22 Ultra, especially on the road and all that, it's very accurate compared to the iPhone, which doesn't look quite as real. Now this, on the other hand, I'm not sure what happened on the iPhone here, because I remember taking like 12 or maybe like 13 shots on the iPhone, and even then it kept like screwing up. Some of the shots like this one were, with me out of focus, which is very odd. Like I've never seen this before, and there were also situations where it gave us this noisy artifact here as well that it didn't make sense. The S22 has no such problems, so yeah, I think the iPhone just screwed up here. I'm gonna give it the benefit of the doubt, but yeah, it's not a good start for the iPhone. But that's it. In this shot, the lighting isn't all that difficult, but I must say the iPhone is doing a far better job right here. Now I do want to point out that the vibe of the sunset, it's not quite 100% accurate on either phone here. I think the iPhone looks a little too neutral, while the S22, yeah, that thing is just straight up crazy, because you can see way too much red in my skin, right? So despite the fact that the iPhone isn't quite reminiscent of a sunset, I would still go for it because, in a shot that has a human subject, skin tones will always take priority. And with 3x zoom, I think it's pretty clear that the iPhone is doing a much better job. You can see this time around, the warmth from the sunset, it's maintained really well. Like you can see that orange glow on my skin on the iPhone, and the S22 has it, but I think the bigger problem on the S22 is just the fact that it's overexposing a lot of the highlights. Now, understandably, the previous shots were pretty challenging, they weren't exactly a cakewalk, but when we go for even lighting, like in this case with the ultrawide cameras, it's pretty clear that both of these phones, they are flagships and they can handle these situations really well. There are fundamental differences like, higher saturation on the S22 and maybe a touch more contrast as well. It's not a huge difference. And the moment we go for, slightly difficult HDR situations, you can see differences emerge. It's not huge in this case, at least with the ultrawide camera. I think the S22 is just generally a little bit darker, so a little bit more crushed shadows, but also slightly better control over the highlights. Not a huge difference once again. You can go either way and have a plenty good image, as you can see. Here's another 3x zoom shot, and this is specifically to demonstrate just how much more detail you can get on the iPhone. Like, compared to the S22 Ultra, there is so much more definition, especially in like the bricks and everything. It looks better. And this is not just, over sharpening and too much processing or anything like that. The iPhone has no haloing or any processing artifacts. So essentially, it's just doing a better job with details compared to the S22 Ultra. But that's it. When you really want to zoom in, basically 10x and anything beyond that, which is pretty obvious, is that the S22 Ultra is going to take a massive lead. Like, it's not even a comparison at this point, because optical zoom, as I found out in my experience, will always take the lead. And you can go up to 30x on the S22 Ultra and get insanely good shots, like very usable, very detailed ones, and it's not even possible on the iPhone. Now, high resolution, so the S22 can take 108 megapixel shots, compared to just 12 on the iPhone. So, as any sane person would, I expected there to be a huge difference in detail. Now, I know that there wasn't going to be 9 times higher detail on the S22 Ultra, but I expected more than this. I somehow feel like the S22 Ultra's processing is, for some very odd reason, not taking full advantage of the 108 megapixels that it captures. So essentially you get images that look kind of soft and mushy. And that's not really good because, there's such a huge difference in resolution that the fact that the iPhone has more detail in this case, it has more noise and sharpening as well, but the fact that it has more detail, it does not spell a good case for the S22 Ultra here, not in the slightest. Now then, for macro, so before we get into the macro part of things, I do want to mention about the colors. It was true for the previous image as well. So basically we have this slight warmth in the greens on the S22 Ultra. Now it is very vibrant compared to what was the realistic colors, but compared to the washed out look on the iPhone, S22 looks a lot more real, and this is exactly how it looked to my eyes, just a little bit more vibrant on the S22 as well. But speaking of macro, actually the iPhone can get closer, as you can see at this point at least. Now then, let's talk about human subjects. Starting off with selfies. Yeah, good lighting conditions, you're not gonna see much of a difference at all. Now, I do think that there is maybe a little bit more sharpness and detail on the iPhone. It's not major, but still, to be entirely honest, in good lighting, you're gonna get great images in both. However, in backlit situations like these, as usual, I think the S22 has improved compared to its predecessor, because I remember the S21 Ultra from last year, it used to really crush shadows just to maintain highlights in the background even in selfies, which is not something you want. You want something like the iPhone does right here. Exposing for the subject is what you'd want when you have a human as your subject. Also, check out the depth of field we're getting on the S22. This is not with portrait mode or anything. I think it goes to show a pretty significant difference in size of the sensor. Up next, a portrait selfie. And again, good lighting, you can get fantastic results here. I do like the contrast on the iPhone a little bit more. The S22 is a little bit more vibrant, so I'm pretty sure that's gonna please a good amount of people as well. But for this one, there was direct sunlight hitting my face, and I must say both are controlling that really well. But I do think that the iPhone is making my skin look a tad bit waxy. The portion where the sun is hitting my face. While the S22 has none of that, I think it's doing a really good job with skin tones, and in general, I do prefer the S22 in this case. Now here's a backlit selfie portrait, and I think both are doing plenty well here. The only thing that I like a little bit more about the iPhone, and it's a minor thing, let me be perfectly clear, is that it has slightly better contrast compared to the S22. Now, you know what? I think it's such a small difference that I'm gonna still call it a tie. Now we can capture 40 megapixel shots with the S22 selfie camera as well. But you see, the same problem that we saw with the 108 megapixel sensor exists here as well. The processing just gives us this mushy result that does not look very nice. I actually think the iPhone has more detail here, which is obviously very odd, and it should not be the case, but that's just how it goes right now. But I can tell you right now, night mode selfie, infinitely better on the S22 Ultra. This is something the iPhone did not improve yet. Just to be clear, both of these phones took about a 3-second exposure, and the difference in processing and the result itself is very clear. Okay, now I'll admit I pushed this a bit too far for the iPhone, given the fact that it doesn't have night mode selfie portraits like the S22 Ultra, but let's be honest, that's an insane difference. The S22 Ultra, despite being as backlit as you can see on the iPhone, it still managed to produce such a good and usable shot. I mean, that blows my mind right there. Now for regular rear camera portraits, I would go so far as to say that it's gonna be pretty similar, and it's gonna depend a lot on preference. But in this case, I would say that the iPhone does feel a little bit better, especially because it has such beautiful contrast right there. Like, the S22 is good, it is definitely a lot more vibrant, it is handling skin tones pretty well. I think there's a bit more magenta than I'd like, but to be honest, I'm gonna side with the iPhone here because that contrast, I'm all about that. But in this 3x zoom portrait, it appears that the phones decided to change places, because now the S22 has a lot more contrast, and I'm liking that as well here, because I just like high contrast in my shots. So I'm going to go with the S22 Ultra here. But despite that, I do want to point out that both phones are doing a fantastic job. But this shot though, this was very tricky because there was barely any light on me, while a bunch of light on the background buildings right there. And the iPhone, it is doing a far better job compared to the S22 Ultra in exposing me. But I do think in that process it has a lot of noise, and the details are not nearly as sharp as the S22 Ultra. But despite that, the shot immediately looks better on the iPhone, so I think that's gonna be my pick here as well. Now this one, well, direct sunlight hitting my face, and yeah, I think the iPhone is very clearly taking a lead. I do think that it might be a little desaturated, especially with my blue shirt, but you know, it's not nearly as big a deal as what we're seeing on the S22 Ultra. That crazy orange, it looks like I got burnt in the Mexico sun or something like that. But yeah, point is, I think the iPhone can handle direct sunlight on the face maybe a touch better compared to the S22 Ultra. But when the sun was behind me in this portrait shot, this is 1x by the way, the iPhone, I don't know why, but it decided to take these as its first 3 shots. While the S22 had no such problem, like you can see, it came out looking plenty good given the situation. But the 4th shot on the iPhone 13 Pro, that looks really good, doesn't it? It's definitely a little bit brighter compared to the S22 Ultra, especially with the shadows. I like the skin tones, I like the way it's preserving the warmth from the sunlight as well. So yeah, the 4th shot on the iPhone 13 Pro, it did a good job there. Now, that inconsistency on the iPhone, of course, it has me on edge. The fact that the S22 took this image immediately had no such issues, I think that's a pretty big deal. Now the night mode portraits, there is a pretty significant difference between these two, and it's not the vibrance. You know, obviously the S22 is more vibrant. You can see my t-shirt has a very saturated maroon in there, but that's not really the big difference here. That's going to depend entirely on preference. The real difference here is that you can see the details on my shirt, they look kind of smeared on the iPhone compared to the S22 Ultra. I mean, clearly it's not working perfectly here. It's like the noise reduction is making it look kind of like satin when it's clearly not. And I don't know how you guys are gonna feel about this, but I'm not a huge fan of it, so for that very reason I'm gonna go with the S22 Ultra. Now this, I thought it was gonna be a very challenging shot for both phones, but it seems like it's not, because that red light is being so well controlled, despite the fact that it was one of the only few light sources that was actually falling on me other than the street light. But yeah, I think this is a very good shot on both. There's that same problem with, you know, a very smooth t-shirt on the iPhone again. While the S22 has no such issues, it has very nice textures on the t-shirt and it looks very realistic as that. So yeah, I'm gonna go with the S22, but honestly this shot at least, it could be anybody's game. However, if you want to zoom in at night with portraits, just go with the S22 Ultra. It clearly is doing a much better job. Both of these phones took about a 2-second exposure, and I mean the difference in the processing and the general clarity of the image, it's very obvious on the S22. Now then, for regular night mode shots. So this is with the main camera on both. It's not a very difficult situation other than the fact that, you know, there's a street light as a backlight in there. But yeah, I think the big difference here is that the S22 has these weird flares, and honestly I think it looks almost artistic in a manner of speaking, but the iPhone does have slightly better control over it. The iPhone also has this green lens reflection on the left side, so yeah, keep that in mind as well. You know, neither are perfect when there's lights in the foreground. It's a similar case in this image as well. You can see the S22 has so much more vibrance in there, but that said, I do think that the color tones, especially on the meadow, it's a little bit more accurate on the S22 compared to the more greenish tint that we have on the iPhone. I do believe that the sky is impeccable on the iPhone 13 Pro. There's a lot of blue on the S22, and personally I like that. I'm gonna admit it right away, I like blue night skies, but I do know that a lot of you guys do not. So for that very reason, I think the iPhone is actually doing a better job with the night sky here. It's definitely got the darkness right, and it does add really good contrast to the shot as well. Now this is a problem on the iPhone 13 Pro far as I've seen. So when you want to take close-ups, you have to use the macro camera. You cannot use a main camera like I did on the S22 Ultra. It's just going to switch over to the ultrawide for taking a macro shot. And at night in particular, if you don't use the main camera, you're not going to get the best quality shot. Neither are you going to get the beautiful bokeh that we got on the S22 Ultra. Now, ultrawide night mode. If you have seen any of the previous iPhone 13 Pro camera comparisons that I've done back when it launched, you'd know that I have complained over and over and over about how the iPhone's, you know, the ultra-wide camera, especially at night, it just does not work well. Or rather, it did not work well, because now it seems Apple pretty much fixed it with software updates. I didn't really expect it, but it seems as if, the crazy amount of noise and artifacting that we used to get, and just a clear lack of detail that used to be present back in the day, that's gone. Now the iPhone is just as good as the S22 Ultra, if not better in some cases. In this image at least, I would say that the iPhone has a better night sky. That the darkness is just beautiful, but it is also crushing the shadows a lot more, and it's overcompensating for the warmth on the road as well. I think the S22 looks more accurate in a manner of speaking. Here's another ultra-wide night mode, and yeah, the S22 has a lens flaring problem. Trust me, I cleaned the lens and same story. It just flares like crazy sometimes. Other times it's somewhat under control. I mean, the iPhone also has flaring, but it's not nearly as insane as the S22 Ultra. And yeah, the iPhone, just take a look at the sky. It looks almost exactly like it did to my eyes. It looks like proper nighttime. Now here we have another ultra-wide shot, and well, basically it's perfect on the iPhone. There's no two ways about that. There's no lens flaring like the S22. There's no artifacting or anything in the sky. It's pitch black, and yes, that is how it looked to my eyes. That's just how nighttime looks, and I think the iPhone does a fantastic job of representing it. And right now, with the ultra-wide camera being as good as it is, I think it's actually better than the S22 in cases like these especially. However, if we zoom in, there is still some noise that makes into the photograph. You can see the detail levels are very similar across the board, but there is significantly higher noise on the iPhone. It's not nearly as bad as before though, because I clearly remember the iPhone's ultra-wide cameras just being crazy bad. Now, however, at night, yeah, this one, it looks really good. However, 3x zoom. So, we get more detail on the iPhone like we saw in daytime. The 3x zoom camera, it definitely feels slightly higher quality on the iPhone compared to the S22. But, if you look at the overall white balance, clearly better on the S22 Ultra. There was the warm light that you see on the S22, that is how it really looked compared to the very neutralized look on the iPhone. 10x zoom on the other hand, well, clear winner on the S22 Ultra. What else would you even expect? Obviously, having optical zoom at night, even though it's very hard to actually capture the image, trust me. Holding your phone still for 3 to 4 seconds at 10x zoom, it's difficult, but the results are worth it, because you can see some very beautiful detail on the S22 compared to a very mushy look on the iPhone. For obvious reasons, it doesn't have optical zoom. And finally, the one big thing that I really like about the S22 is the ability to capture the moon. You cannot even come close to images like these on the iPhone. And well, this is 30x zoom, and you can go all the way to 100x, and it still looks amazing, right? Yeah, it's a little bit soft, but this is some of the best possible moonshots that you will ever get to see from any smartphone. There are other smartphones that compete the S22 Ultra. The iPhone obviously is not one of them. So with that said, I think that it was very close, and of course we were comparing a lot of human subjects here, because that's one of the things the iPhone does well, and it's one of the areas where I really thought that both phones would really dish it out, and that's exactly what happened. But despite that, I expected it to be really close with human subjects. Some places of course the iPhone pulled ahead, but there were also certain instances where the S22 did a better job, so it can go a little back and forth. But what surprised me the most was the ultra-wide night mode. The way the iPhone has improved, it was unprecedented, and honestly I did not expect it. I remember complaining about the ultra-wide night mode not being good back when the iPhone 12 had launched. Speaking of updates, I think the S22 will improve as well. We saw a lot of inconsistency on the S22 Ultra today, and I feel like this is something that might get addressed with future updates. So yeah, with that said, I think it's going to be a fun year with the S22 Ultra and many other flagships that are going to come out. So if you are interested in those camera comparisons, they're definitely going to come out the moment I can get my hands on them. With that said though, I think the review for the S22 Ultra is going to come out next. Not entirely certain on that, but yeah, I'm planning on it. So yeah, definitely stay tuned for that, subscribe if you haven't already, and I will be seeing you guys then. Cheers.